Hey everybody, Rob here. It's time for a couple of new ProRevenge stories. First one, the time I got my manager a promotion, so he quit. Let's jump right in. Thank you for subscribing, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. I am gonna have to be a little vague on some details to protect myself here, so I can't discuss the type of business, etc. So it's going to be a struggle. This is a lot of background to explain. The kind of situation that developed over a decade, a place that was once truly fun to work at and easy to earn a bit of extra overtime, became a dog-eat-dog struggle to survive. The low-level peons like me were split between those who felt disenfranchised and hated by the management, those that were basically looking for an escape route, and that group of snakes who would smile to your face and act sympathetic to your situation before sneaking away to inform the managers of anything they had learned which might have value. We were in a specific area of the business that was isolated and slowly being replaced by technology. So from over 1,000 in our building, it dropped to just around 250 when I left. Most of this was done through voluntary redundancy, but the managers were given incentive to fire as many as possible to save money on VR. And since manager jobs were also slowly being cut, they were desperate to fire as many as possible. But most were incapable of following procedure. Mike was that intelligent and brutal kind of manager who, like the others, had been promoted into the position, but knowing he wouldn't get trained, officially took it upon himself to become competent. The man had gotten dozens of people fired directly, and more indirectly, by helping less competent managers follow the correct procedure. A certain quantity of work at a certain level of quality was required, which everyone met, yet they had a bottom and a top 10 list, and if you were on the bottom 10 list, your job was on the line, regardless if you met the basic requirements. Since there was always a bottom 10 by definition, there were always 10 people on the firing line. This might be vague, but it has to be. Mike's team was a sort of a clearinghouse for the bottom 10. We were shifted between shifts and teams for various reasons, but what I quickly learned is that somehow the shift's bottom 10 were all on Mike's team. Now, my performance was consistently in the top 10, so I was safe on that count, but my attendance was low due to health issues, and my attitude was really bad. I also learned that the rest of the team was made up of people who weren't low in performance, but had low attendance and attitude problems just like me. And we had all been on the chopping block by managers who failed to follow procedure. In short, Mike was the executioner of the workforce. The most vulnerable to being fired were shifted around to his team so he could succeed where others had failed. Sooner or later, my time came. My health caused a series of absences while I had hospitalizations, and Mike pounced into action. In the space of a year, he made 7 attempts to fire me, and each time I involved HR, who stepped in and protected me. I approached HR to make a case that what was happening was wrong, not just to me but to everyone. I made the case that the situation of Mike being the executioner created a hostile work environment, and the fact that I had gotten his attempts to fire me thrown out proved that he was not only hostile, but was actively toxic. That it was against the law to discriminate on age and disability, and a myriad of other arguments. I was told that there was nothing they could do. Mike was untouchable, and had the full support of the upper management in our building because he was saving a lot of money in voluntary redundancy payouts by firing the vulnerable. Legally, there might be a case, but it would have to go through a court system and not through HR, unless I had an example of him being hostile and abusive. The person I spoke to was very sympathetic, and he suggested I look into some things related to job opportunities that were coming up. He mentioned that many of them were managerial positions because a new type of roaming manager had been introduced. These were very needed and weren't getting much interest. Think substitute teacher, where a manager gets sent all around the country at the drop of a hat. It didn't occur to me instantly, but weeks later as I sat at work listening to Mike talk about his family, it clicked into place and my plan began to take form. Instead of making a complaint, I gave a glowing review and had several others do the same. If we couldn't get the man fired for his actions, we could get him promoted into a job that he couldn't take. The managers in our area were not even being considered for transfers because they lacked the training and qualifications to be managers anywhere else. Our reviews might just push him over the line into getting a promotion, and since roaming managers were being sought, the two should dovetail nicely. We didn't give the reviews to our management, but directly higher up the food chain, way above anyone that ever dealt with our area of the business. Each of us mentioned that Mike had done an amazing job at sorting out problems, etc., had great managerial skills, and an in-depth knowledge of procedure. Then we sat back and waited. A few months went by with nothing happening, and I thought the attempt had failed. But then we came in to Mike losing his mind. He was shouting at the shift manager, his boss, about how he wasn't being given a choice. Turns out, the higher management had gotten our reviews, looked into his record, and decided he was a perfect fit for the roaming manager position. And since they were in the process of getting rid of managers in our area, they insisted that Mike be pushed into it. Mike had of course tried to refuse the promotion, as was his right, but the higher management had made it a choice of accept the promotion or be demoted back to peon. Mike had a family and couldn't just uproot them whenever the company needed him elsewhere, and a demotion with a pay cut back into the workforce of people who despised him and that were slowly being culled was just as bad. So he asked for a voluntary redundancy instead and was accepted. His last day, he went berserk shouting and swearing about how badly the company had treated him after all he had done. I was unfortunately absent for it, but got a play-by-play and loved every second of it. Since I was told explicitly that I couldn't get him punished or fired, I got him a promotion he couldn't accept instead. What an interesting way to deal with a manager, one that we haven't heard on ProRevenge before, or at least not in the 320 something stories that I've put up on this channel. Crazy. On to our next story. Mike finds a way to get rid of problem employee. Let's jump right in. The revenge wasn't mine, but I figured I'd share as I witnessed to the beginning. Certain names and details changed to protect the guilty. Background: years back I worked for a large bank in the UK. We all worked on the same floor and in the same department, but within different teams. I was just passing through on a secondment and saw the beginning of this revenge, but was filled in on the aftermath later. One of the teams was run by a woman called Sarah. Sarah was by many measures a good manager, but she had a blind spot. That blind spot was a woman called Helen. Now, when I was in my previous role, I interacted with Helen a fair bit, and she had seemed friendly, but when it came to actually working with her, she was a nightmare. She'd tattle, steal ideas and credit, and generally throw you under the bus at any opportunity. I'm not sure why Sarah always protected her, but it soon became a sore point for most people on the floor who had to deal with her. Enter Mike, who was the manager of a smaller team. Mike could be a bit of a dick, but was still professional and fun to work with. To give you an idea of his character, I found out I was being made redundant, and even though he wasn't my manager, he heard about it and booked time out to help me with my CV and do interview practice. Shortly after, it was announced that Mike's smaller team was being dissolved, and the staff either made redundant or moved to other teams. At the time of the cuts, the economy in the UK was in a bad state, and all the banks were looking for efficiencies. He was redeployed and took the vacant manager role under Sarah that Helen had been gunning for. To make matters worse, Helen now reported directly to him. Helen was furious and spent no time in making her discontent known, as she felt she was entitled to the promotion. Unfortunately for her, Mike was wise to her. They'd both joined the company around the same time, and so he knew exactly what she was like. He'd even had her blame him for her mistakes before. Even the project she'd gotten so much praise for had been work one of his staff had done. So he started the process of documenting her poor work and attitude to manage her out of the business. Sarah, however, would not allow it. Helen was a high performer in her eyes, and she wouldn't sign off on him getting rid of her. When I left the team, Mike was frustrated with her and wasn't sure what to do. The revenge. I met up with Mike a year later, and he shared how he'd solved the Helen problem with me because he knew all of the issues I'd had with her. Because Sarah had his hands tied, his only other option to get Helen out of the team was for her to leave of her own accord. He couldn't oust her by making her life difficult or she'd go to Sarah, so he went the other way. The motherfucker sat through every performance meeting with her for the rest of the year, gritting his teeth and praising her. That then justified him giving her a really high performance rating. He also used his own contacts to find roles in other teams at his grade that he then talked up to Helen. These roles were specifically selected because they specialized in one of the things Helen claimed she was an expert at, but had very little real experience in. Basically, roles where he knew she'd have the highest chance of shitting the bed. Eventually, she applied for one, and he spent several weeks coaching her for the interview. In the company at that time, the interviews were scored off of 3 main factors: performance rating in current role, competency-based interview results, relevant experience. He'd done everything he could to make her shine in all 3. She took the promotion, and within 2 months, had quit the bank. He knew she wasn't ready for the responsibility, didn't have the skills, and her poor work ethic would be exposed. Worst case, she'd get her shit together, and he'd still look like the perfect manager to Sarah. I was really surprised to see 2 stories this morning that were both promote them to get them out of the way. Good work to both of the OPs. I want to thank both OPs for posting their stories to the ProRevenge subreddit. You can visit them at the links in the description below. Please go there and give them an upvote. Once again, this is Rob from Karma Comment Chameleon saying thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with your friends. And we'll see you in the next one.